Okay, so this meeting is being recorded. Hope everybody's cool with that. All right, so let's get started. Today we have a couple folks from the Montana State Library, and they've been putting together they've recently had a two-day imagery summit kickoff, and they are working toward a statewide imagery plan. So we thought it would be really helpful to learn from Montana as Idaho goes in that direction. But before we get to that, I just wanted to give a quick update on the 2023 Idaho NAEP. So if you'll remember, there was a 33 tiles, 33 DOQQs up in northern Idaho that were not collected last year. And so Hexagon is working to fill in those gaps this summer. I believe it started, as best I know, it started June 1st. And if anyone has any updates or corrections to that, just let me know, just speak right up. But according to this chart, it looks like the 2023 Idaho NAEP will be delivered to USDA by the end of August. And then hopefully there on out will be a quick turnaround and we could finally get that data out and published through Inside Idaho, as well as ISU training and research facility. So just be on the lookout for announcements through Geotech on any updates to that. I'll give you just a second for folks to speak up if you have any questions right off the bat before we get into our presentation. Okay, that being none said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'd like to introduce you to our two presenters. We have Erin Fashaway, who is, and apologies if I mispronounced that, she is the State GIS Coordinator at Montana State Library. And we also have with us Troy Blandford. He is the Water Information Lead at the Montana State Library, and as well, he co-leads the Montana Imagery Working Group. So it's very nice to meet you. Thank you for taking time out to help us pick your brains a little bit.
Well, yeah, thank you for having us. And since we don't have a huge group, we probably could make this a little more conversational if we have a lot of slides planned, of course. But if anybody has questions, wants to stop us kind of and ask us a question before we move on to the other slide, just let us know. You can pop a hand up, you can just interrupt it. That won't bother neither Troy or I. So please feel free to do that if you so choose, if you need some clarification on anything. But without further ado, we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to take the first part of the presentation, but if you want to go ahead and move on, Troy. So again, thanks for having us join your group today. Oh, I can present. Oh, this is great.
Erin,
I'm sorry.
Can I check on a couple things here?
Yeah.
It's got on the right, it's got a notes section. At least I'm seeing it. Are the participants seeing that, or just
no,
wondering if there's a way to turn that up? Okay, it must just be on mine. Great. I think you may be able to advance slides.
I can. Yeah, this is great.
Excellent. Cool.
We're finally.
I've never actually done it this way. But.
Yeah, realizing how we can use Zoom technology, or not Zoom. Sorry, Teams.
Well, if I could just interrupt for just a second, that's probably my bad as far as the transcribing goes. Is that what you're talking about? Would you like me to turn that off?
No, he's just in presentation mode and he can see his own notes.
Oh, okay.
No, we're good. I rarely present this way in Teams, so this is great.
Okay. I believe too, just for the participants, I believe you can also jump around on the slides. So if we go over something fast and you want to hang around on one of the slides, you can.
Oh, that's a good point. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I appreciate your flexibility. That I think that works the best is
Great.
if we could just pop in, but carry on.
Sure. Okay, so thanks again for having us. My name is Erin Fashway. I'm the State GIS Coordinator for the state of Montana. I'm joined here today with Troy Blanford. He is the Water Information Lead and the WIS, the Water Information Systems Manager. And I guess I can do a little bit of background. I'm originally from Ohio. I worked for Esri, worked for a water and sewer district before I moved to Montana back in 2006. So I've been here 18 years and started working for the state. I've been with the state ever since. And when I first joined the state of Montana, I was working on critical infrastructure, so structures and addresses, things like that. After 9/11, that was a really big push to collect that information. And then I started doing boundary work, and I did boundary work for, oh gosh, 8 years. Then I moved on to the Department of Transportation. And I was an analyst there, responsible for many different things before I came back to the state library and took the role of GIS coordinator. Troy, do you just want to do a brief background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. Troy Blanford. I'm from Idaho, so I'm a sucker for presenting to this group. Can't resist if I get an offer to present to give an update to Idaho. Yeah, grew up in Idaho, graduated from the University of Idaho with a bachelor's and a master's of geography. So good to be talking with Idaho. I been working with the state for about the same amount of time as Aaron, about 18 years. I started with the Department of Natural Resources, working with water rights and water resources information, and then did that for about 8 years, and then transitioned over to the Montana State Library and became the Water Information System Lead. Main responsibilities is hydrography. Also, within the last couple of years, got involved with LIDAR because of the connections there between elevation and hydrography. And then now started assisting with ortho imagery.
All right. Thank you. So I guess what Troy is trying to say, if you ever invite him to Idaho, he'd feel free to join you. All right, so here are the things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about our organization, because I think it's important for you to understand how we're organized and how we get things done in regards to our framework data sets. We're going to talk about the working group, the current state of imagery for Montana. We're going to talk about how we are kind of reinvigorating things with the imagery working group and some of the needs that we've seen coming from other state agencies and tribal and local government.
Aaron, I think I might have to actually advance slides. I think you see something different.
Oh, no, I can. Oh, yeah. Okay. Go ahead and the next one.
Just let me know.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I'm advancing and you guys are seeing.
You can do your own thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
All right, you can go on to the next one. And so GIS coordination, we've had a kind of an interesting history in the state of Montana. And we started out, go ahead and go to the next slide. We started out having just a program within the state library. Oh gosh, I think it started in the 80s, and that was the Natural Resource Information System. And basically, it was that legislation and those programs were created to basically put all the data into one place and have one agency responsible for publishing it, because a lot of the agencies didn't have capacity to do GIS quite yet. And so we are, gosh, one of the first customers of Esri. So we have a pretty interesting background in Montana when it comes to natural resource information. And then, so we'll call that natural geography, and then the human geography side of things. Then in 2005, we passed some legislation that allowed for state coordination. It allowed for the creation of the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure. And then just recently, we've passed more legislation that allows for a state real-time network. And I'm not going to go into that too much, but I think it's just important to say that we started a network several years ago, coordination with Utah, I believe Idaho, or some reps from Idaho were on some of those initial calls. The state of Washington we partnered with, and tribes and local government in Montana. So go ahead and next slide. So I'll just talk to you a little bit about the Montana Geospatial Information Act. Up until several years ago, it was referred to as the Montana Land Information Act. And so it was originally enacted in 2005 under the Montana Land Information Act name and title. We updated it recently to be just more modernized, and there's a big push by the current administration to just do a really deep dive review of our code. And so it was an opportunity for us to take a look at things, to see what was working, and to then just modernize the language to meet modern terms. And so we went with the Montana Geospatial Information Act. Under this act, is what gives us the authority to do statewide coordination for us to represent the state of Montana on national or international regional geospatial activities. We have an advisory council. We also, under this act, are able to create the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure. We have a grant program. We have a geospatial information plan, so that sets forth our priorities. It used to be the land information plan, and the reason why I want to make note of that is because it went from a 1-year planning process to more of it needs to be reviewed every 3 years. And then through some strategic planning process that we started back in 21, it also allows for us to do strategic planning. So I see a hand up, Margie.
Yes, so all of this came about, was that through legislative support?
Oh, yeah.
Or just through the community? Okay, legislative.
Yeah, so the NRIS, gosh, that was like way before my time in the 80s. So I think we could probably get a history for you and maybe send you some slides, because we've done our director, or no, yeah, not our director, our division administrator did do a brief survey recently of important dates and other important events that's happened. And so he outlined this history. So we probably could find those and send those along. But in the 80s, I think it was one of the bigger reasons was some of the EPA sites that were addressing, especially in Butte, that were addressing some of the major pollution down there, and there was a need for all this environmental and natural resource information to be collected, and I believe that was the driver there. Troy, can you confirm that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was super fun. Issues and data being collected that needed to be shared and made available. And some legislation established the Natural Resource Information System.
Right.
Well, that makes sense. It's usually a hazardous situation that brings people together.
Right. And then just the embracing, GIS was kind of, starting out, and there was a need for us to have that very important natural resource information, because, we're also a state that does a lot of natural resource extraction. And so there was a need there from a lot of different agencies. And so that's when that got started. And then in 2000 oh gosh, it started in the 90s, I do believe. But finally in 2005, there were several groups that had pushed for the MGIA, like I said, MLIA at the time. And I think the biggest driver of that, and it's funny because Troy and I were actually digging into some historical records yesterday for some questions that was asked of us, and it was a result of having the need for statewide cadastral. And we're not going to dive into that today, but we've basically had a statewide cadastral. We were the first ones to have that since about 2005, if not earlier. But it was the 50 States Initiative. And so that was an order from, it was a presidential order. And from that, NSGIC, which is the National States Geographic Information Council, they were really pushing for this as well. And it's what created the MSDI, the NSDI, and a lot of other spatial data infrastructures across the US, gave them that framework. It also came with some funding, I believe, from FGDC, USGS to create statewide strategic plans and do other types of data work. But that's really, in a nutshell, like super high level. We probably could find other folks that could give us a more in-depth history who were working at that time. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next slide. So this basically just outlines the duties that basically pushes GIS coordination. We work with all stakeholders, including but not limited to federal, state, local, private, tribal entities, to basically collect, develop, and maintain the GIS data. And that would be, it's not outlined here. The MSDI, it is outlined in rule, but basically this allows us to prioritize and work with all these different stakeholders to collect the MSDI information. So why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide? And like I said, under that, we have a geospatial information plan. So that we write that in coordination with our advisory council. And we basically outline the current, I guess, the current status of where we are and where we want to go. And we outline the budget on how we're going to get there. The geospatial information plan has not been actually written yet. We're currently working off a land information plan because these statutory changes are quite new. And so, but in that plan, the way we frame it is we have priorities of the council, priorities of the grant program, priorities of each individual MSDI layer, and then priorities for coordination. And so it's about a 20-page plan. And Troy, if you want to drop the link to the plan in there, that would be fantastic. And then if you want to go ahead to the next one. So we went from a 22-member council to a 12-member council. And it's interesting if you speak with other states, the size and I guess makeup of their councils. I think North Carolina has the largest council. In working with our counterpart, Wilma's and I's counterpart in North Carolina, Tim Johnson. He told me recently, I think they went from 36 to 38 or 32. So they have a very large council, and we went with more of a smaller, nimble council. In the past, we had 4 agency directors that were appointed. We had, I think it was 2 or 3 local government. We had a Montana representative, a Montana senator, trying to think of who else got cut. We had multiple federal reps, and that got cut. And then I think private business also got, no, I'm sorry, that's on there. It was like a utilities. There was like two that could quasi be utilities and private business, and they kind of got merged into one. So you can see here our current makeup. We have 2 that are vacant, but we worked with the governor's office and council members to come up with what we thought was a good number that still had representatives from our major stakeholder groups. And then this doesn't limit representation. Each MSDI theme, which I'll get into in a minute, has working groups, and anyone can join those working groups. And so we kind of take and have this overarching council, and then from there we'll have different working groups associated with each of the themes, and then spin up any other kind of important working groups, whether it's a policy related or maybe a it could be related to a specific standard. So we that's how we currently organize things. But I saw that Wilma came off camera, so go for it, Wilma.
Okay, I have a question. So one of the things that we've been kind of moving away from, I noticed you have like a state agency director on there and the director of the Department of Administration. I think what we found is that they're typically, folks like that are too busy and maybe don't know enough about data to sort of feel like they make an impact. So ours has kind of moved more towards just GIS analysts, people that are just active. So what have you found? Like, what kind of contributions do those directors make, and how is that working for you?
Well, I would say it's very similar in Montana. So let's see. How do I start this? When we had a House of Representatives rep and a Senator rep, we didn't get a lot of interaction and attendance. But every once in a while, someone would be appointed that would be somewhat interested, and they would try to attend. Those folks are also very busy. And I believe it was that they actually pointed it out and said, we don't think that, I think it was their idea to say, we don't really feel like it's a good use of our time. So I think that they were the ones that started that discussion of potentially pulling themselves off. And then the directors, honestly, it's GIS was highly political when I first came to the state of Montana. And some directors were involved, but from my experience, it has always been a designee. And so Adam Carpenter, he is our state CDO. And Karen Coleman, she is an analyst / database administrator for the DNRC. So we typically always have a designee, because it's just like you said, it's very difficult for them to get to these meetings. They might not have a ton of interest, and they have other things. They're busy people that they have to do. However, I will say we had the DNRC director join us for several years before he moved on, and his name was John Tubbs. He was appointed under the Obama administration. And when he could come, he gave a lot of wonderful insight, and it was awesome. And it just brings the attention to this whole other level, and they can give really great direction on policy and budgets and legislative activities and advocacy and things like that. So I would say that it's good to try to keep those communities involved. And if it can't be through your council, then maybe you can do presentations at a cabinet or, give targeted information, things like that. But I think it's important, if you can, try to have them on board. Maybe not the appointment, but in some way keep them on board, because those are your stakeholders.
They are. Yep.
Yeah. Good question. All right. You want to head on over to the next slide? So what does the council do? So the Montana State Library does not, just a little bit of background, does not have a seat at the cabinet. They're not a cabinet appointed position. We have a commission, the Montana State Library Commission, that is our governing body. And then we also have the council, which gives advisement on all the geospatial information activities. And so these are some of the major activities and things that our council gives us advisement on. So that would be obviously the annual, or the 3-year geospatial information plan, the strategic planning, the budget, our grant priorities, the grant program in general. The council is active in our grant program, best practices and standards, what we are doing for GIS coordination and outreach activities, and then, of course, last but not least, the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure. So moving on to the national and the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure. So this is an old image. It's not my favorite. In fact, I don't like it, but it I guess FGDC is doing their best. And so this kind of, if you've never seen this, I guess has anyone seen this? This tries to explain the NSDI in an image. And so I think it's important for everyone to understand that what we're doing is we are creating our data sets based on some national framework so that then our information can flow up to the nation and maybe eventually into a global infrastructure. And so I think it's really important. And very similarly to the NSDI, we model it, our program such as this. So we have 15 different themes currently defined. So obviously we are here. Oh, my arrow got adjusted, but it should point to imagery. So we originally adopted the first, I think it was 6 or 7 at the time of the original legislation. And then the council and stakeholders got together and said, you know what, we want to add these other ones because these are very important to Montanans and our business activities. And so we have added these additional ones, but obviously imagery is what we are here to speak about today. So you can go on to the next slide. So what does it mean to manage and maintain a framework theme? Honestly, it's going to be different depending on the theme and the stewardship, and we'll get to some of those slides here in a moment. But basically, it means that first of all, there has to be some statewide data available, or we're working towards it. Most of our data layers, we are in some sort of maintenance mode and have full statewide collection in some capacity. Obviously, things like LiDAR imagery, we need to constantly be collecting that information and moving to the next latest and greatest data model or version of the technology, whether it's collecting LiDAR statewide to produce better elevation information and better hydro information, or just collecting imagery to have high res available for Montanans. And so we focus on the data creation and collection, maintenance, making it accessible to the public. So if it's not accessible to the public, then, that's one of the pillars of the MSDI, that it is publicly accessible. Otherwise, it's not considered MSDI. We have working groups that help give feedback, such as this working group for Idaho, give feedback on how we're doing, help us with inventories and things like that Troy's going to dive into further. And those are typically open to everyone who can attend and give us their feedback. We have theme plans, and then, of course, best practices and standards. All right, moving on to the next slide. So this basically defines our theme stewardship and theme leads. So you can see that the Montana State Library is actively managing and stewarding most of the MSDI frameworks. So I believe it's 9. And then we partner with these other agencies to make sure that that information is out there and available, and that they can come to the council and sometimes get support depending on what it is. Basically, usually for coordination and like outreach activities, rather than we can't fund all of these 15 layers from the MGIA funding. And so it's just important that we all follow similar policies and best practices when it comes to managing the themes. So each theme is has at least one person managing it. We have one currently vacant. We had some pretty significant budget cuts in 2017, and geographic names has kind of stayed on the back burner because of some of the other really important initiatives that we've got going on. One being elections, geo-enabled elections, one being next gen, and the other one currently being imagery. And of course, last but not least, of course, elevation has taken a lot of our time recently. Funding, MLIA funding, or MGIAC, it's so new that I still mess up and call it MLIA. That is a loaded question right now. Because I guess we avoided it in these slides, Troy. But our funding is tied to recordation fees. And so that at the local government level, basically we get a set number of dollars for every page recorded. And that was increased in 17 we were cut, 19 we were studied, 21 I think is when that was enacted, and then in 23 the language changed. And so it went from us getting 75 cents a page to $1.50 a page. And I know that Idaho has probably seen very similar activity to housing and migration with COVID. And so what we saw was massive migration rates to Montana during COVID. And what happened there was we had astronomically high recordation fees. And then also at the same time, everybody was refinancing their homes. And so what that does at the local government level is that drives up the number of recorded pages. And so we saw astronomically high recordations followed by astronomically low because of interest rates. So our funding is unfortunately impacted by the economy, well, like most people's funding, and housing activity. And at this point, we are at a pretty low. What that's going to drive us to do is potentially look for some options next legislative session. So we have a legislative session every other year. And I won't get into it too much now, just because we're still at the beginning stages of that. If you want to go ahead and okay, thank you. So what does collaboration look like for the imagery working group? Well, basically, we will develop standards for imagery data. We are working on creating an inventory of existing data. We are understanding the business use cases and critical activities that rely solely upon imagery or rely heavily upon imagery. And of course, explore cost efficiencies and shared resources. Basically, who can help us find funding or support our efforts, because in a lot of cases we aren't the ones with the big pots of money, but we are the coordinators that help explore those resources and support the cause. And then of course develop an imagery plan. Go ahead on to the next one. So we are going to work on creating standards and best practices for imagery, basically to make sure that the information is widely used. Duplication of efforts is so costly that we can create efficiencies so that everyone, I guess, maybe this isn't as bad as it used to be, but everyone's not downloading, the statewide NAEP and putting it on their computer. We want to reduce duplicative efforts, so bringing all the stakeholders together to the table to see where we can save time and save money. It's very important to us. Go ahead and move on to the next. So what do we do? How do we promote and communicate what we are doing with the imagery working group and what we're trying to accomplish with the MSDI theme? So we provide training. We bring in subject matter experts on webinars to our working group meetings. We have folks present case studies, other examples of what states are doing. We do hands-on training events. We ourselves can provide expertise on the data. We work with our stakeholders, and so some of the tools that we use, we have Gov Delivery, which is like a sign up for emails type of system, just regular email updates. We have websites. We do direct invites. We just recently started doing imagery summits. We have working group meetings. We also just participate in events like this, and then of course other conferences and such. We have a grant program that can be supportive of our efforts. We actually did have, I believe it is in 2018, the Big Sky area. There was a water and sewer district that needed to collect imagery, and we were able to support them through that grant program. Of course, it's a very small grant program. Typically, we give out about $250,000 a year. And so that was like one of the only times I really remember imagery being collected. It can be used on whatever we think is important and needs to be prioritized. But lately, it's typically being used to prioritize data collection efforts to support next-gen geonative elections and then improve cadastral. And then, of course, we represent Montana local, regionally, and nationally, and work with NSGIC and other federal government to help push the dial on imagery for the nation. So I think that, well, we got one more slide. So I liked Troy's analogy. When we're working with our stakeholders or our decision makers that really just don't understand GIS, we like to tell them it's the bottom of the sandwich. So it's the bottom bread when we're creating the sandwich. And so it's very important to us. And a lot of folks start with imagery, whether they understand it or not. They have imagery on, whether it's in Google Maps or in any kind of application that the state of Montana is putting up. It's just that I know I'm preaching to the choir here. It's just so important to have that information. And I think it's also important to kind of display the information in useful ways where, if you have some sort of image, people really, I think those folks you only have a small amount of time with, like the directors, the folks that have the power to make big decisions, those folks are really important to have produce the information in different ways so that they can retell it or also just understand it better themselves. And then last slide, and I'm going to let Troy take over, is basically we've been working on imagery for a long time, but like I alluded to earlier, we had a 2017 budget cuts. But before that, we had a working group meeting regularly to explore imagery program for Montana. It was, I think, when Washington had gotten their imagery program passed. It was very recent. I think it was like 16 or 17 when they got theirs passed. And so we were starting to explore that and the needs of Montana. And then we had some major economic downturns with natural resource extraction and some really bad fire seasons here, which you guys probably equally had poor fire seasons in Idaho. It's nice to talk to a neighbor because you understand many of the issues that we have are very similar to your issues. And so because of that, we had to just put a pin in it for later. And so we've officially started this revival based on some needs that the Department of Transportation came to us on, the Department of Revenue. And I think, Troy, you're going to talk about some of those use cases, but we basically kind of got the party started again and are reinvigorated to move forward. And then, Wilma, I did see you came off camera. If you have more questions you want me to try to answer.
Yes, I wasn't sure if Troy was going to talk about that, but two questions I have. One, how you did the inventory or how you're planning to do an inventory.
Yeah.
And then the second question is what mechanism are you using to collect money and distribute money?
Yeah. Troy will get into that. Right now, we're not there with the collecting and distributing money. I do believe we have a fund available, though, that we could potentially use. But we're not quite there yet. But we know, I think we had a fund created a few years ago, but I'll let Troy get into that. I think that's some of the next legislative steps that we'd have to take. But I also can, when we are there, remind me to talk to you guys about how some contractors will do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to exchange the money, which really makes it, I don't know, a heck of a lot easier if you don't want to have to deal on that.
Right.
So,
thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So I'm going to go off camera and let Troy get started. Thanks, Troy.
Aaron, there was a question about where the funding for the grant program comes from?
Oh, that is a part of, that's just a part of the overall budget. So typically, if you look at the land information plan, I think the budget's on like page 16 or 17. So typically we've been allocating about $250,000 annually since I got started. I wanted to increase it this year to support some NHD, LE hydro data updates, and up in Blaine County, which is north of here, about 3 hours. But because of the downturn, we weren't able to increase it. Everything we've just seen that in the, probably when I first got started as coordinator, the grant program could fund like maybe 15 projects, and now it's like 7 or 8. And so to be more impactful, I wanted to start increasing that budget. I think I will continue to request an increase in that budget to allow for some of these bigger projects. But it is funded out of that, currently out of that pot of money. So good question. All right, Troy, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Thanks for the background there. And I hope Idaho is seeing some kind of parallels there from what you do and what we do, and how we can share and learn together. We've got our imagery working group kicking off. We're calling it the remix here. And Aaron touched on this, but we had at least a draft plan back in 2009. And that was, of course, kind of the earlier days of NAEP. I believe Idaho, Montana got their first collection in 2015. And at that time, NAEP was being collected every 4 years, and it was reasonably new, and it was meeting people's needs. State agencies were pleased. Most Montana needs were being met through NAEP. So we've seen since then NAEP really be what we rely on for our imagery program within Montana. And we're starting to hear now about higher resolution, leaf off, and other needs that are starting to drive us towards reinvigorating this group and getting an imagery plan going. So what really got this kicked off? We held a Montana Imagery Summit in mid-December. It was a 2-day event. I don't know how well you're seeing that, but it's a snapshot of the agenda. And a couple of things I want to highlight there is we did this, and I have a couple slides on this in just a second, but we did a roll call where we asked state agencies and federal agencies and tribal to take 5 minutes and hit on some of these key points. What are the pain points? What would you hope to get out of an imagery program? So that was kind of how we initially started participation and getting people interested in the working group. And this imagery summit, it was intended to kind of generate excitement, get people talking about imagery, just to really kick off the working group again. So there within day one. Day one was all about bringing in imagery subject matter experts, and the various imagery vendors and private industry out there are happy to do this. I think Aaron and I pulled this together really quickly in a matter of weeks, I think. We just put out a call, say, hey, we're going to be holding this imagery summit. We'd like presentations on how to handle historic imagery, how to manage imagery and Imagery in ArcGIS software, examples of imagery programs, other states, like what's working. And we got really good response there. We were able to put together 10 presentations from industry experts, talking about anything from historic imagery to kind of up and coming AI and machine learning type examples.
Hey, Troy.
Yeah.
This is Margie. Yes, Idaho also did that in our imagery working group. We invited various vendors to come and present their products. The one downside to that, and it was a very slight one. I mean, we really enjoyed the presentations, but people needed to know, how much does it cost? And they were very hesitant to offer that, and I totally understand. But I do I see a couple of names on here that maybe we have not reached out to before, but we have had Eagle View and Hexagon and Nearmap come, and I'm sure there's some others that I just can't recall right now. But I think it was very beneficial to see the different platforms that are available. and what the different options are. But again, I think what Idaho really needs is kind of the group mentality so that we can all go in together as a group and choose something rather than piecemeal it together. So I guess this was just an extremely long way of just saying that we need to work on the coordination part of it and then maybe approach it like you have here. I like it. I really like this summit agenda. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. And I will say that so the alluding to, we turned it around quite quickly. When we were attending NSGIC, so my director, Jenny Stapp, she's the state librarian, chair of the council. When we were attending NSGIC in New Orleans, we had been talking about this for a while, imagery, getting things started. And she's like, we need to have a summit. It kind of was born actually out of this event during the conference called Speed Networking. And so basically you sit down with all the private partners and you talk about what's going on. There's a state one too, where we talk about what's going on with our state counterparts, spend a little bit of time, and then basically kind of starts the discussion for the year with that particular subject matter expert, or maybe just for the conference itself. And then the other thing we kind of copied was the roll call. At NSGIC, we do a roll call of states where everybody has to answer like 3 or 4 questions. And that really is it's very impactful, and everyone really responded well to it, to Montana. And so that roll call was very impactful. And maybe that's something that you guys could mimic as well. People really liked that.
Yeah, I have a few more slides on that, Erin. Well, we can
cool.
look at, but yeah, I purposely put those in this presentation because I thought that was really successful, and it was what got a lot of response after the summit, just seeing that, you've got half a dozen state agencies here all saying, hey, we've got imagery. We're not great about getting it out there for people. And just everybody just realizing like there's similar efforts here. And if we can kind of all come together, like you're saying, Wilma, as the group group effort here.
And then lastly, I just wanted to say that, we initially didn't really have too much of a budget for this, but we opened it up to allow for folks to sponsor. And I got to tell you, these folks were so supportive, and they wanted to sponsor, and it really kind of helped make the event really special. But in addition to that, this was hybrid. I don't know if we said that quite yet. We had it here at a hotel. But we also had what these technologies are called owls. It's a really cool thing. We can talk about it later. We use those throughout the room to help make a good experience for people online. And the way I think you should know, because sometimes it's just like, well, how do you invite these private partners if you're, working for a state or government? You don't want to look like you're providing too much favoritism. But the way we decided to choose them was if they had ever done business with the state of Montana, if they were active in our working group, and then we just worked with our other partners that we belong, that we're part of groups with NSGIC, and then our local association, MAGIP, and we kind of found them that way and invited them to this event. And then if someone had an interest, and we had not heard of them before, we certainly took that under consideration. But that's how we chose these folks to help participate. All right, thanks. I'll shut up now.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Erin. And then day 2. So day 1 was subject matter experts, people experts in imagery, generate excitement, bringing everybody up to date on changes in technology. And then day 2 was really the start of kind of the working group sessions. So we did some online work in cloud, shared spreadsheets and things like that, of just gathering needs, gathering, a start to imagery that folks have, talking about how we might go about legislative planning. So that was really a half day of discussion. So follow up to that day 1 of how can we make this happen for Montana. We do have the slides and also the recordings from the Imagery Summit out on our website. You can see the link there. Probably if you just Google MSDI Ortho Imagery, you'll probably get to that page, and maybe halfway down there's information about the presentations and recordings. So you can check out those resources if you're interested. So the roll call, Aaron was just mentioning this. I think we kind of walked away from the Imagery Summit thinking this was kind of one of the highlights. This is what gave us the most information that we needed to start to move forward with a imagery plan and formalizing the working group. So we invited 5 state agencies, 3 local government, and university. We also invited tribal, although we didn't get anybody actually made the presentation or made it to the summit to present, but they were invited. We asked 4 questions. What aerial imagery does your organization have, and how is that made available? Is it publicly available, or is there licensing? How is it? How do you get the imagery? Then list your top 2 to 3 business uses. So what are those critical activities that you need imagery for? And then that third one, what are their pain points? We saw a lot of parallels with these. It's difficult to work with, difficult for us to store and get out. And that's really where this concept or this need for like a repository came about, that the various state agencies have their challenges there, and that a preferred method might be a repository, maybe something at the state library or kind of led by the working group to inventory and bring imagery together. And then just the kind of vision statement from each person about what a state imagery program would look like to them. What would the benefits be? So each presenter had about 5 minutes to answer any or all those questions. So they could pick just one question if they wanted to stay on that, or briefly go through each one. And then at the very end, we had additional time for anyone in the audience to speak up and answer some of those questions for their agencies. So here's the roll call participants. The state library, myself, gave a presentation on kind of what we saw some of the needs were as the state library. We heard from the Department of Natural Resources. They handle water rights in the state, and they've got needs for historic imagery as well as current imagery for assessing water rights, and also all sorts of other water resources efforts. We heard from the Department of Transportation. They are collecting lots of imagery within Montana along roads for design and repair. What's interesting with the Department of Transportation is that imagery is really collected for specific programs, specific projects. And when that program or project ends, the imagery is just kind of there. It's kind of lost, or they don't have a good way of getting that out. So they're looking to the working group as, can you help us make this more broadly available? Department of Revenue brought to the table some of their needs and how those have changed as Montana grows. You see more development, you see changes in housing. For tax purposes, they need to be able to have good review of that on aerial imagery. We're finding that NAEP just doesn't work for them, and that ultimately they might need oblique imagery or leaf off imagery or higher resolution 6-inch imagery to really meet their needs. The Department of Environmental Quality, they're an interesting one because they're doing starting to do a lot of drone work. And so kind of similar to DOT, they collect this imagery for specific projects, and then they don't have a great way of getting that out to everybody. Interesting, we also heard from the University of Montana. So this would be kind of an archive role. So historic imagery from 1930s, 40s, that's being scanned. It's largely in boxes right now. They make it available as best as they can, but they aren't GIS people. And so it's not geo-referenced, geo-ortho-rectified. So they've got needs for assistance with that. And what are the best ways to serve that imagery out? If it's not geo-referenced, and is the state GIS interested in that, or how can we assist? And then the cities, the larger cities in Montana, they often have a large enough tax base that they can do an imagery program. Some of them collect every couple years, very high resolution 6-inch or even better imagery. So there's this contrast between the haves and the have-nots. Those larger cities that are able to do imagery programs, they'd be interested in kind of broadening that to not just within city limits, but the county, the entire area. And then we've got the cities that just don't have the revenue to be able to conduct an imagery program. So if it were led by the state and they could kind of jump on at smaller amounts, smaller dollar amounts, that's very, very attractive to them. And similar there for the counties. We've got counties that are able to do some imagery collection and other counties that just can't. So key takeaways. So what did we walk away from the Imagery Summit with? This is really the purpose for the working group. This was kind of the establishment of the needs. We heard that multiple organizations within Montana, multiple state agencies have imagery. It's currently challenging to find and obtain. And so there's this need for a repository and inventory of existing imagery. Aaron went into depth about our GIS coordination and the other key role there. We're GIS coordination, but we're also the clearinghouse for GIS, much like you guys have inside Idaho. The state library is that role for Montana. Need for productive collaborations and coordination across agencies. And Aaron, if you put you on the spot here, but the example from Belgrade, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good example. So you probably have said this, but we do have several counties and cities that go out and they collect imagery data. And some of them are like on a 3-year rotation. Some of them are on a 5. It really just depends. And we started thinking, gosh, I wonder what it would cost to have the city of Bozeman and the city of Helena flown with the same project. Like, could we help coordinate those efforts to save some money for those local governments? And which is one of the reasons why we started kind of moving in this direction, because I was like, there's got to be a shared cost here. And then, part of that is just talking to these experts to say, could there be a shared cost? Like, what would that look like? Are Helena and the city of Bozeman close enough, as the crow flies? And so I think that we have also seen this in a more closer proximity with the city of Belgrade and the city of Bozeman. So if you're not familiar with the geography of Montana, the city of Belgrade is very close in proximity to the city of Bozeman. And the city of Bozeman went out to collect imagery, went out for RFP, went through the process, and unfortunately had already, I think, signed the contract. There was no way to stop the process because the city of Belgrade reached out and said, hey, can you, during your flight, can you collect the Bozeman International Airport? So that airport actually exists in the city of Belgrade. And unfortunately, it was too late. And so having more impactful stories like that really helps our efforts to say, there is a need for coordination. There is a need for communication about these activities. And that is one of the roles that the Montana State Library and this imagery working group can fulfill. So that is that specific story.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. So then the third one here, I mentioned that kind of early on with the imagery working group and ortho imagery with Montana, NAEP was meeting a lot of the needs. We're hearing now from agencies that, the resolution, the leaf on, doesn't quite cut it. Department of Revenue is a great example there. They need to be able to see new development. Leaf off would be ideal there. They need high resolution, 6-inch or better. So we're seeing, really most agencies are expressing to us that 6-inch to 1 foot is probably required to really fully meet their needs. The working group has also identified, or coming out of the summit, the funding. We touched on this a little bit early. earlier, that it's really hard to get numbers and really figure out what the pricing might be. But really talking about that and understanding other funding opportunities. What are the funding opportunities? What are strategies for outreach? And then multiple counties and cities expressed this really strong desire that the contracting has to be simple, to have this 1.1 payment contract. So there's this interest from many that if we could go with one large single contract that people can kind of piggyback on and join and do add-ons to meet their needs is the way to go. And so we've talked with some other states about where that's happening and how that's working. And then just a strong desire for technical sessions. Presentations from Imagery and other raster analysis and imagery management. So using this working group as technical and learning from everyone. So this slide just touches on the current state of imagery within Montana. Like I said, we are currently very reliant on NAEP. We get NAEP approximately every 2 years. Statewide, 60 centimeters. I think that's similar for a lot of for all the states. But we've relied on that, and it's got the job done so far. And we want to start to transition. This is a snapshot of the Montana Air Photo Browser. I was kind of perusing some of the Idaho's content, and I think you guys have the Idaho Imagery Explorer. Very similar, but you can get to the various imagery years that are available, see the date that image was collected. You see most of these are NAEP, but we do have a few other statewide collections. We've pulled together one from 1990s, roughly, a black and white, and then more recently we have a historic imagery service of mid 20th century imagery. So imagery in Montana, we've got these statewide collections. It's often like a single body or kind of a lead there, often, maybe the Montana State Library along with federal agencies to bring in statewide imagery. But then we've also got these ad hoc imagery collections that happen at the city level, at the county level. And I think what's important to point out there is that those are often collected for specific programs, and that imagery kind of remains with that program and kind of goes as the project goes. And so this working group, and I'm sure this is the same for Idaho, is really focused on making imagery broadly available and used with this idea that, the value of imagery, it's collected once, the more it's used, the more valuable it becomes. So now to get into kind of a recap of working group tasks to date, what have we been doing so far? And again, it's all fairly new here. We'd really kicked off December, January. We've had meetings in March, April, May. So really just getting going here. These are the kind of 4 initial tasks that we've been tackling. We started with the charter, and that is pretty much fully developed, ready for signature. We'll go through a little bit of the charter. It's couldn't be more boring to look at a document, so I've summarized it into a slide here. We're also working on a needs assessment. What are the state agencies' needs and others, not just state agencies, cities, counties, federal as well? What are the business uses and those critical activities? We're trying to model this as best as we can after some of you are probably familiar with the USGS hydrography benefits study and also their elevation study. Of course, that was nationwide and they had a contractor, so much bigger there. We're trying to do within Montana, just really get a good understanding of how imagery is used and what are those critical kind of statute or rules that really require imagery, whether historic or more recent. We're going to use that to pull together a business case for an image repository led by the working group and perhaps at the Montana State Library. And then all these things, these are really the start of these sections for our Montana imagery plan. So the real goal of the imagery working group is to put together a Montana imagery plan. And these are some of those initial sections that we're working on. I believe I saw a question. Private companies and their role. Can you maybe touch on that, Aaron? I think we've tried with Northwest Energy and some other private companies to get their interest. We haven't had a whole lot of participation to date, but we certainly reach out.
Yeah, if anything, we have a lot of nonprofits that that have interest, but we have not had any success with private companies yet, unfortunately. So some of the nonprofits would be, specifically for elevation, I bet imagery too, but like the ski resorts and I think Northwestern Energy is a nonprofit. I'm trying to think of some of the others. I think Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, some of those other types that are interested in seeing the imagery. And then there was another one that just came to mind. Yeah. We don't really have a good show there, unfortunately.
So what do you think is holding the more private companies back from working with you? Because I'm thinking they're the ones with the money.
You know, I don't know. So we kind of sometimes you just start with people you know, right? And so I have friends that work for Northwestern Energy. One of them is the kind of manages dams in the state. And so I started working with him on LiDAR. And I think, sometimes at the time, I think you can start, but if you don't have, private businesses work so differently. If you don't have like your business plan ready and you're just trying to explore opportunities and you don't have that that fund they can contribute to, and you're not ready to purchase anything, I think that can be hard for them to try to be a part of the day-to-day events up until the point when they're ready to kind of pull the trigger. And so unless
That
there's
makes
such
sense.
yeah, as I said, I would say unless there's such a need, like where people are going to push for it, but I just haven't. I mean, maybe, like honestly, engineering companies and surveying companies, those probably would be the ones that would probably benefit the most. And so I'm trying to think of some of the bigger names around town, like Morrison Merrily, Great West Engineering. What are some of the other bigger ones?
Do you have
CDM
any
Smith. Yeah.
lumber companies, maybe?
Oh, Weyerhaeuser, that's huge, obviously. I think they have their own imagery program. Yeah. We haven't really dabbled with the military because they're, again, another entity that's kind of difficult to coordinate with, just because, it's just it's kind of a behemoth organization. But it is another potential because of the missile silos kind of strewn across Montana. That could be someone else we could potentially get some funding with, but that's just a really hard organization to get to the right person.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Good questions.
Yeah.
And if we have successes, we'll let you know.
Appreciate it. I appreciate it. I just look up to Montana. It's like, what are they doing? And then, come here, do the same. Yeah.
Interesting enough there too that the private industry ends up being one of our biggest users, especially for LiDAR. We've seen that these consulting firms love having that data. So seeing more participation there would be great. I agree with Aaron that it's really difficult for them to get that okay at the executive level, like to go forward with it. So they're always interested, kind of hovering on the outside, just on the outside, but it's really hard to hit that execution with them. So the charter, we find the charter to be extremely important for working groups. Idaho's probably done these as well. But this is really about formulating the purpose of the working group and being as specific as we possibly can with that. We had success with this within the elevation working group. Like, we made sure that group focused in on our goal, and our purpose is to finish up statewide elevation data. So they had that very specific goal and purpose to move through that first year, and we were able to put together a plan that we were able to show to USGS and other states about our interest in participation. So taking that same approach with imagery, trying to be really specific with what we're trying to do within the first year or two, and that's about trying to get this imagery plan done. The charter touch, you see the kind of the topics there that the charter hits on, but the authority, what formulates this working group, what's our meeting frequency, what resources are required, and that's important for participants because it's really volunteer time, takes you away from your other projects. Membership and roles is probably the most important piece of that charter, is outlining who's involved, who are the active participants, who's going to be in the meetings, who's going to be providing content reviewing documents for us, versus those who are more there for gathering information, or the recipients. So we outlined some of that within the charter. And then, of course, the leadership structure there, myself and Aaron, with the authority of the MGIC that Aaron has touched on. Really key within the charter is those participant roles, really identifying what different members can do or assist with. This is super valuable when we go to writing the plan or needing graphics, things like that. We've got kind of a list of which participants or members would be interested in providing that kind of assistance. So you see those, we sent out a survey to all the participants on this, and they kind of picked, yeah, I'd love to be able to just represent my organization and our needs, or we'd be able to provide graphics and visualizations for reports and things like that. So our active members, we've got state agencies, federal agencies, counties, university, city, the GIS Professionals Organization is involved, tribal members, and also very importantly, the imagery vendors and the consultants. And I've talked about this already, about how key their participation is. They're really the subject matter experts and have a ton to bring to the table, and can assist with developing the plan and some of the technical details there. So in addition to those active members at the bottom there, the working groups, most meetings have an additional 12 to 20 people who join that working group meeting. And they're really folks that are just interested in being informed and taking stuff back to their organization and letting folks know what's going on. And then the email list for the working group right now is about 60 people. Obviously, some of those participate, some of them join when they can, or review the agenda and pick up on the items of interest to them. So this is just a look at our last agenda. So this was in May, our May meeting, and just what I wanted to point out in here, I've mentioned, but just learning from other states and learning from the imagery vendors, having them present. They will very much welcome this and want to be involved. We heard from the state of Washington last month about their imagery program, how that kicked off, how's it going, those sorts of things. We also heard from North Dakota and an image repository effort that they're undergoing. So just parallels there with our efforts to work on an imagery repository for Montana. And the presentation from Wolpert, just trying to understand different options, purchasing options, the pros and cons of conventional versus off the shelf versus hybrid approaches. And then, of course, all working groups, it's really about information sharing. And so at the end of most of those meetings, we'll have a time for everyone to kind of share what's going on with imagery, what imagery is coming up, what new collections are happening. Just try to coordinate at that level.
Hello, Troy. Can you hear me?
Can.
Yeah, this is Manny from Madison County, Montana.
Hey, Manny.
Hey. I think I haven't fully attended a single imagery working group meeting because I had some other tasks. But one of the questions I have is, when we bring in speakers from other states or from private companies talking about their imagery efforts, are we collecting best practices from all those different efforts? Are we recording them, or are we just, are we attending the meetings, just doing general information gathering, or have we, are we taking down notes on on stuff that we like and possibly incorporating that into our imagery plan?
It's the latter for sure. So I do have a running document going, kind of lessons learned from other states, like what seems to be working really well,
Okay.
perhaps what have been some of those challenges. So yeah, we're trying to document that best we can, and that will be a part of the imagery work of the imagery plan for sure, is kind of challengings and lessons learned from other states. Yeah, great
Okay.
comment.
Okay, thanks.
So one of the first efforts here for the working group has been this inventory of existing imagery. you see there kind of the metadata type information that we're trying to gather from various state agencies. We're doing this one by one, one-on-one with folks. It's sending out a survey. You're lucky to get 25% response. And so we're going about this pretty slowly, but we're working individually with each group and just trying to walk them through this and work on one-on-one to get responses from them. But we're just finding a primary contact for imagery within the organization. What kind of imagery do they have? What's the geographic extent? Do we see in statewide? Do we see regional, county? What is it that they have? Is it made publicly available? And we're seeing a mix of that. Some of it is, some of it isn't, some of it kind of is by request, or it's difficult for them to find and really get out. How do you make it available? Is it self-serve, web services? Do you have to make a request? How's that work? And then, of course, thinking about a repository, we've got to get a good handle on storage size. I think so far from what we've inventoried, we're looking at somewhere in the 150 terabytes of just the a couple dozen organizations that we've worked through so far. And then starting to gather those areas of interest and what footprints are covered, what imagery has actually been collected. We've seen a mix of that too. Some agencies have a pretty good handle on that. Some of them don't have them available at all. So some of these collections would be quite the effort to try to understand just what is available. And then just gathering, what are the benefits of this? What would be the benefits of a central repository? And would a central repository be preferred for these various agencies? And that's been a resounding yes, that people really would like to see this, a better effort on bringing imagery together in one place. So the other effort going on is business use and critical activities. I mentioned that we're trying to model this as best as we can after the hydrography benefit study and the elevation benefit study led by the USGS. But this is really about finding those rules and that statute that is really specific about this is the need for imagery. We need imagery from prior to October 1st, 2011 in order to do, historic use of navigable riverbeds, or for applications of easements, what are the dates that are important for that, prior to 1997. Specific things mentioned in statute and rules that really highlight the importance of imagery. We see that as really critical when you go to the legislative session and asking for funding, of being able to say, hey, there's these rules and statute in place. In order to do those, this imagery is really important. So all this, the needs and the business use and critical activities kind of go into a business case, establishing a business case for a repository. So you can see here on the left, what's our current state of imagery in Montana? And on the right, what's the desired alternative? So this is things like imagery. We're finding that imagery is difficult to find, difficult to use. The alternative would be for an imagery working group to lead, or the Montana State Library to lead a shared resources and improved awareness of imagery efforts. We're hearing from agencies about imagery requests that they receive and how that takes away from their programs. They're more than willing to do it, but they'd much rather see kind of an agency that's designated for that. And that agency within Montana is the Montana State Library. And then just that limited serving of imagery means limited use and value, and just trying to get to a point where increasing use as much as possible really increases the value of the imagery. So legislative funding and planning. You see a couple key dates there for Montana. We're coming up on in January 2025. Our next legislative session is going to kick off. You see a couple kind of key dates here. The State Library Commission, who kind of guides our work. April 17th, they were starting to execute their planning and budgeting for next year. And then April 30th, House Bill 10. These are our long-range information technology. These have passed now, and we've already seen that we haven't seen imagery move forward in either of those, and we likely won't for that June 6th deadline either. So these are challenges that working groups face, and that state agencies especially face. Aaron mentioned the revenue shortfalls that we're seeing right now. That's obviously impacting some of the decisions that get made for planning going forward. So the working group becomes important here because there's opportunity now for other state agencies to step up and be the champion to take that to the legislature, working group to maybe be the impetus there to make things happen. And then it's also a wake up to, you need to be looking at other funding opportunities too. So, we've recognized that developing a funding and grant opportunities list would be important for our imagery efforts. So future meetings and announcements, just the link there, that's the website where we post about them. Aaron mentioned it's to stay informed about what's happening at the state library and the working group and other MSDI efforts. You can subscribe to Gov Delivery. That's where all of our news and announcements goes out through, including the meeting invites. I just want to end on this one. Our working group is open to anyone. We want everyone to recognize that, and that, Idaho, other states, anyone's welcome to join us. We can all learn together.
Well, I appreciate that open invitation. So don't be surprised if you see some of the names that are people attending today to start showing up to your meetings. I think I'm going to certainly try to just see what I can pick up. This was an absolutely very informative, excellent presentation by you both. I really appreciate you taking the time. You put a lot of effort into your slides. Will you send me this presentation so that I could post it up on our imagery framework website?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd love to.
That'd be
Yeah,
great.
I think the funny thing is, Margie, we're like, oh, we'll only need like 20 minutes, then we'll open it up for discussion. And then I look at I was like, man, I am so long-winded sometimes. And I was like, well, I was giving a lot of good information. It's just like Troy and I were completely off on the estimate. Well, we stayed within our limit though.
It's very, very helpful. I think all the information has been extremely helpful. So thank you.
It's funny because when we were initially thinking about this, we're like, well, how exciting can it possibly be to talk about an inventory spreadsheet and a business case activity? So we're like, oh, maybe we'll hit 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then have a bunch of time for discussion. But obviously, there's a whole lot more to share here, and I hope you all saw parallels with Idaho and learned some things from us. And then I've also been looking at what Idaho's doing and Inside Idaho and your Imagery Explorer. So we're learning as well.
Yes, that resource that we have at the University of Idaho, and Bruce Godfrey, who is on the line here, is just exceptional. I think we all rely on that quite a bit. I would love to get more imagery available through that platform, if Bruce is open to it, but most especially, some of, like you were mentioning, either private companies and or smaller entities that are purchasing imagery and spending a lot of money for it. I just wish they could open that up a little bit and offer it to others, access to other people, or somehow, if we could just get that available to the wider public, that would be awesome. But so let me go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that we kind of like there's room for potentially our two states to coordinate as well on future collections, especially your panhandle, and then also I think that having these universities present on these phone calls, like if there's any kind of effort through like university funding or through some sort of educational component, and we can bring in the University of Montana and then Montana State, we'd be happy to try to collaborate those efforts, or Montana Tech. So I think that that's something we can, if you're interested in, or like we want to try to think outside of the box, anything would be helpful.
Yeah, this is Manny again. Last month I sent you the contact information for the Montana Headwaters Tech Hub. Have you contacted them, or have they gone back to you?
We are aware of Tech Hub. I guess we can do a little offline debriefing on that with you too, Manny.
Sorry about that. Okay.
No, that's okay. So there's some funding, federal funding that is being put into what's called a tech hub. They're all over the U.S. I don't think I can give too much information on it, but they're trying to develop an economy for sensors. So that would be like LiDAR and other types of imagery sensors. It's with the university and other nonprofits and private industry. I don't know if it's been fully funded or chosen yet as the hub, but I know Tester's office is aware of it. They've asked me about it when I met with them recently. And then also, I'm working with Mary Kriegel from the Department of Commerce, who was highly involved in that, and so I'm hoping to explore that more potentially this summer. But yes, I am aware.
Okay. All right. Good luck. Hopefully something good comes out of it. Thanks.
Yeah, hopefully. It'd be great for Montana.
So I welcome anybody that's still on the call to unmute yourself and ask away as far as questions or make your comments.
Yeah, this is Jason Brown with Eagle View here. I'm been sitting on the call, and I just want to, not a question, but I just want to say that Aaron and Troy have done an amazing job in Montana. I was at the Imagery Summit in December, and it was really well put on. I thought it was really informative, and I think it's really helped open eyes in Montana, especially at the legislator, type position, because since within the last 6 months to a year, it seems like there's been a lot more support coming from legislators than in years past. So I just want to say kudos to them. And if you guys here in Idaho have any questions, they're great people to have.
Thanks, Jason. And we really appreciate Eagle View supporting that event and, being supporters of our MEGIP and then NISJIC as well. So thank you very much. It's very appreciated.
So Margie and group, I think we need to go down this road here in Idaho, but that would be a great place to talk about next meeting, maybe, Margie, just to see how we can get this off the ground. But it's
Certainly
nice to have a template. Yeah.
Yeah. Field trip is what I'm thinking, but
yeah, join us. If you want us back to discuss how we did our collection on like the inventory, please let us know. We are happy to collaborate with you folks on these efforts. And Troy might have mentioned it, but we basically, mimicry is like the best form of flattery, right? Well, we're using what we learned from NISJIC pilot initiative to do the LiDAR, so for 3DEP. And we're kind of copying some of the things we thought worked well for that program. I think there's another hand up. Can't see who's.
It's John. Go ahead.
Oh, John.
Yeah, thank you both. That was I echo Margie's comments. That was a great presentation. And Aaron, I love your analogy of imagery as the bottom bread of the sandwich. There's two kinds of GIS people, right? There's some who put the imagery on the bottom. There's some who put the elevation on the bottom.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm the former, and I drape the imagery over the elevation. But that takes me into my
that's just a really good
here.
sandwich, John.
Since this is an imagery twig here, I wanted to just let everyone know, and we were talking about NAPE to some degree. There's also another product available, the NAPE DSM, and it's a digital surface model photogrammetrically derived from the NAPE statewide. And we have some academic interest in purchasing this for Idaho. And I don't know if it's been done in the past. And I'm new to Idaho, so I don't know like the history of everything that's happened here, prior to 2023. But it's a fairly economically like feasible way of getting a surface model for the entire state, kind of in a snapshot. Of course, the NAPE is not shot, in one day, but it correlates like because it's derived from the NAEP imagery, it correlates like 1-to-1 basis with the statewide NAEP. And they're looking for funding partners for this product. So if anyone's interested, I think our leadership with NRCS is going to try to get a demo organized over Teams. And if anyone would be interested in that, I would encourage them to contact me. And I can put my contact information and a PDF like informational sheet on the product in the chat here.
John,
So,
I would appreciate that. This is Margie. And yes, could you put down the imagery twig as being interested? I'd very much be interested in having NRCS presenting that and asking what the options are as far as buying or funding, being a funding partner.
okay, yeah, I would be happy to. And Margie, would it be easier if I put it in a chat? In the chat
Yes,
here,
yes.
or should I just email you and let you send it out?
Oh, no, go ahead and include, do both, if you
Okay.
don't mind. Include it in
I'll
the
do
chat
both.
and then send me
Yeah.
an email. Yeah, that'd be
And
great.
then our national folks, our umbrella organization, if you will, they thought after June 17th would be when they would be able to present. I'm going to have some leave scheduled, so yeah, I might ask if you could get back to me by the 13th, just so I can forward on any information in case that happens while I'm out of the office. But I'll include that in the information I send out.
That'd be great. Great.
All right,
Thank you.
sounds great. So that's all I had.
All right.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Sorry, it's man again. Early in the presentation, Troy, you talked about getting GIS data, not just imagery data, up to, I guess, national standards so it could get fed to the national level. What federal agencies does the GIS data get fed to?
Good questions.
I don't know for imagery. Obviously for
Honestly,
elevation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I was
Erin.
just gonna say, I think it'd be open to anyone. For imagery right now, there's no. I guess okay. So if we buy up NAEP, the NAEP program, then that would be fed and be the official data set, the national imagery data set. But if it's like an individual collect, that's just open to anyone to come in and grab. And so right now, I don't know of anyone pulling that. However, all the other STI layers, that's a whole different ball game. I don't know if we have a lot of time to go into how they're fed, but Troy, if you wanted to say something, and I will say I do have to run. It's my son's barbecue. It's the last full day of school, and so I do have to head out here. And mine, obviously, Troy, your email is my email here. I was going to say my email's here, but I just noticed that that's not my email.
I messed that up, but I did put it in the chat.
Well, I mean, if you want to take my emails, that's great. I mean, I would love for somebody to start answering my emails.
I will immediately forward them.
Yeah, thanks. But Troy, you can, if you want to answer that question. I just want to say goodbye and thanks everybody. I'm going to jump my emails in there. Feel free to email me. That'll be perfectly fine. And we'd love to, help coordinate further. So thanks everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks, Erin.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Hi.
I really don't have any more to add there to your question, Manny. I was just gonna say for elevation, obviously USGS, we follow USGS specs. Any LiDAR collected within Montana, we want it to follow the USGS specifications. A lot of it is collected by 3DET, but we have some LiDAR being collected by the DNRC, and our specs match what the USGS requests, and then we submit that data to the USGS for inclusion in their program. It goes through QC and some back and forth to get it all to line up, but we make sure we do all that kind of stuff with any of our federal themes.
Okay, that's good to know. And you probably already know this. I formerly worked for NGA, and I was aware that federal agencies they have some sort of national like geospatial. It's like a working group across all the different federal agencies. So I was, yeah, I was just wondering if data gets fed to that, so the data gets fed across all the federal agencies. But I mean, I don't know, something maybe we could explore later. But just good to know that. I was just curious to know which federal agencies was actually getting data. So thanks for answering my question.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, do we have any more questions? I think we're sort of getting down to the end of our meeting here. So I'll just open it up for just another couple seconds. All right. Okay, let's see. I'm looking at a calendar very quickly to see when our July meeting might occur. It looks like July 3rd is the first Wednesday of the month, so that might be a little iffy. It's so close to the holiday. We may postpone July, so just keep on the lookout through the Geotech listserv of whether or not we will have a July Imagery TWG meeting. But again, thank you very much to Aaron and Troy. Really enjoyed your presentation. If you would either send me a link to this presentation or send it to me directly, I'd greatly appreciate it, and we'll get that posted on our framework website. So let's see. All right. Well, I am going to stop recording, and I wish everyone a very sunny and enjoyable afternoon. So we'll talk to y'all later. Thank you again. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.